Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Let It Come Down. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Let It Come Down with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Let It Come Down is a 1952 novel by American author Paul Bowles. Bowles was an accomplished writer, composer, and translator of Moroccan, Spanish, Portuguese, and French literature. Probably, literally, he is best known for his first novel, Sheltering Sky, which was beautifully adapted into a film by famous Italian director Bernardo Bertolucci, and starring John Malkovich and Deborah Winger. He also, more than anybody I can think of, symbolizes the American expat. Bowles traveled a lot and moved to Tangier International Zone, today Marruecos, in the 1940s, and stayed there for more than 50 years, until his death in 1999. Famous American travel writer Paul Theroux wrote in one of his books that American expats always go back home. There might be a crazy Englishman, a strange German, or a refugee Pole that stay, but Americans always go back. Well, Bowles never did and became the most famous expatriate living in Tangier. His wife, Jane, joined him there and also stayed until her own death, even though it seems she hated Tangier and probably living there contributed to her early death. They had somewhat of an eccentric marriage, since both of them were bisexuals and seemed to prefer other people as sexual partners. Further, Bowles was a part of the Beat Generation and was visited in Marruecco by his other famous contemporaries, including Ginsberg, Kerouac, and Burroughs. It must have been a quiet experience, especially for Burroughs, since it seems to have been the inspiration to write Naked Lunch. Bowles himself was a prolific short story writer, most of them influenced by his residence in North Africa, and some considered among the best ever written by an American. There are a few published volumes which feature many of them. What is Let It Come Down about? It is about an escape from your life by going to a faraway, unknown place in an effort to find your real, new, or just different self. It is somewhat a story of an American expat. What a wonderful thing to be an American, he said impetuously. Yes, said Dyer automatically, never having given much thought to what it would be like not to be an American. It seems somehow the natural thing to be. It could be even considered a general story of any expat, arriving in a new, strange place and feeling similar to a child, confused, lost, and committing plenty of mistakes in an effort to learn one's way, and in the end being taught that everything is a cause and effect. A bit of the plot. The book begins with the quote from Shakespeare's Macbeth, "It will be rain tonight, let it come down." And it seems to refer to the rain observed by the hero of the story, Nelson Dyer, and further it is personified by him as a metaphor for his stay in Tangier. Dyer, who tired of his monotone life in New York, the boring job in the bank, and repetitive social routine, arrives in Tangier where he plans on starting anew. But because of the financial pressure, he reluctantly accepts a job in a travel agency run by a family friend who lives in Tangier, Wilcox. Further, he meets a local barber, Tammy, has a sexual adventure and becomes fond of a teenage prostitute, Hadija, and is exposed to a variety of expats residing in Tangier International Zone, which includes a middle-aged lesbian, Eunice, an American socialite, Daisy de Valverde, a shady businessman, Mr. Ashcombe Danvers, and Russian spy, Madame Jouvenon. They all want something from Dyer, which because of his own needs, even greed, and also inexperience, he's not able to refuse. And this creates circumstances that put him on a path of unintentional self-destruction. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Let It Come Down? I enjoyed it very much, even though the story starts a bit slow, but it picks up rather quickly. For me, what made it good was the variety of characters involved in the plot, and each one being explored in depth. Foremost Dyer, who is the stranger in the strange land, a lost traveler ready to be victimized. He's running away from victimhood, but doesn't know you cannot change who you are by changing your physical location. He is instantly disappointed with Tangier because his expectations of feeling different are not met. On the way there, he tried to convince himself things will be different and he would feel different. But once he arrived, he felt exactly the same. And his disappointment is further confirmed at the party where he is told, Tangier is more New York than New York. Then you must see how alike the two places are. The life revolves wholly about the making of money. Practically everyone is dishonest. In New York you have Wall Street, here you have the Bourse. In New York you have the slick financiers, here the money changers. In New York you have your racketeers, here you have your smugglers, and you have every nationality and no civic pride. His disappointment is further subtly relayed when in the letter to his mother he complains about the weather not being very warm. He, like many people, must have thought that because Tangier is in Africa, the climate must be tropical. But it is not. It is Mediterranean, and it can be chilly with low temperatures approaching freezing and snowfall at higher elevations. Dyer, above all, is naive because of his young age and limited experience, and because of it unable to see and accept the place for what it is instead of what he would like it to be. He asks, can't anyone in this town tell the truth? Because he doesn't know the truth is a valuable commodity, especially in a place like Tangier, with many entities, national and ethnic, competing for limited resources. Churchill said, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. He was referring to war, but when we are not at war in some abstract sense. The other expats, and even natives, see Dyer as somewhat of a useful idiot and try to take advantage of his innocence. He is also morally weak, and others can sense it. He can resist vices, sex, money, and drugs, eating cannabis mushroom candy and smoking keef hashish, and all of it combined is responsible for his descent. Not really the people, who are there just tempting and testing his fortitude. He went to Tangier to start anew, but right away he commits the mistake of maintaining his ties to his old life by accepting a job from Wilcox, who is an old family friend. And Dyer does it because he needs money and it is an easier option in the short run. Further, he puts money over loyalty by accepting Madame Jouvenon's proposition. He crosses Eunice because he is horny and takes drugs when offered by Daisy Valverde and Tammy because he wants to change how he feels. And all this short-sighted vision, probably the result of being young, somewhat submissive and lacking ability and will for deep reflection, contributes to his downfall. Dyer reminds me, and is a bit of a paradox, of Meursault from Camus' The Stranger. He's a stranger in the strange land, somewhat disconnected, and he's a victim of society, but more so he is a victim of his own individuality, and he's aware he needs others. With each day as it passed, Dyer had been feeling a little further from the world. It was inevitable that at some point he should make a voluntary effort to put himself back in the middle of it again. To be able to believe fully in the reality of the circumstances in which a man finds himself, he must feel that they bear some relation, however distant, to other situations he has known. One of the first people Dyer meets upon his arrival in Tangier is Tami, who is quite a fascinating character. He represents the locals, Berber Muslims, but because of his un-Muslim-like behavior, mainly drinking and womanizing, is somewhat of an outcast, and probably because of it feels drawn to Dyer, who is in similar situation. Still, he could not think of the mass of Moroccans without contempt. He had no patience with their ignorance and backwardness. If he damned the Europeans with one breath, he was bound to damn the Moroccans with the next. No one escaped but him, and that was because he hated himself most of all. Tami had a potential to become Dyer's ally and somewhat of a guide, but unfortunately, Dyer is too distrusting to see it, and the relationship ends tragically for both of them. Eunice, perhaps the most fascinating of the novel's characters, seems American with her educated way of speaking, but her nationality is somewhat vague. She is a survivor, street smart, and only trusts herself. She is one of those eternal travelers, or more appropriately expats, moving from place to place, and after a while they lose their national identity. They learn a language of each place they temporarily reside in, and with time their accent becomes unplaceable. She has plans for the young girl, Hadija, and sees Dyer not as a competitor since he is not at her intellectual level, but a temporary nuisance that must be removed. She pretty accurately sizes him up during the couple encounters between them and sets an appropriate trap. Her intentions toward Hadija are not very clearly presented. I don't know if the attraction is sexual or she is looking for a daughter figure to add to her somewhat lonely and boring life. Hadija is another representative of the native population, a poor local girl who learned how to use her youth and beauty and body as a survival tool and easily gives herself to anybody willing to pay or has something she considers of value. Mostly men, but if a woman can offer more, so be it. She is rather two-dimensional, but she is only a girl without much history or experience, while outside of sex. Daisy de Valverde is an aging and bored housewife. She says to Dyer, "You'll be wanting a good many books to read, I should think," she said. "Do feel free to borrow anything here that interests you." "I don't read much," said Dyer. "But my dear lamb, whatever are you going to do all day? You'll be bored to distraction." I think the last sentence relates to her feelings about her own life in Tangier. Like most characters in the novel, she feels superior to Dyer and tries to draw him closer to her, probably in somewhat desperate effort to affirm her own youth and physical attraction, which is quickly disappearing. These are the characters I found most interesting, and together with a couple more, they are responsible for Dyer's downwards trajectory. The location of the plot is somewhat mysterious Tangier International Zone, which at the time was still governed by a collection of European colonial powers, and the complexity of the place reflects well in the novel's characters. I found it, in many ways, similar to Humphrey Bogart's Casablanca. Tangier was kind of ambiguous because of its location in Africa, but Europe within an eyesight, and the mix of the people, nationalities, cultures, and religions, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. He still felt coreless. He was no one, and he was standing here in the middle of no country. The place was counterfeited, a waiting room between connections, a transition from one way of being to another, which for the moment was neither way, no way. It was no man's land between Europe and Africa, and people behave in accordance with it. Many residents were dedicated to a variety of unscrupulous and illegal activities, such as spying, money laundering, prostitution, pornography, and drugs. Paul Ball's death in 1999 was kind of a symbolic end of that era, even though the political end came some 40 years before with independence, and since then Tangier has just been another Moroccan city. And all we have left to remember its fascinating past is books like Let It Come Down. To sum it up, Let It Come Down is a good read with an interesting plot. It probably relates to Ball's own initial impression of Tangier. It is a common story of running away from one's life to a physically distant place with hope of finding something new, better, and usually being disappointed because the problems we are trying to leave behind are not in the place we are in, but inside ourselves. But the change of our surroundings, going from familiar to unknown, has an ability to bring out what we would prefer to keep invisible, or even what we didn't know we possessed or were able to do. Further, the novel gives an intimate look into Tangier International Zone, which had a fascinating history, and life there seemed a complex and dark web of relations between the residents. And perhaps the plot is inspired by some of the author's early experiences there, or maybe by the stories he heard. I know this from my own experience that in the faraway exotic places we need to worry about the locals since we have tendency to underestimate them, but we need to be even more careful about the people from our own neck of the woods who have been there for an extended period of time. Because, as Madame Juvenal tells Dyer, here in Tangier, everybody just tries to survive best they can. And survival changes you, the way you see and rationalize the world, and what you are willing and capable to do. Further, Bowles excels in describing alternate realities. I think he does it best in Sheltering Sky, of being suspended somewhere between life and death, but it is also very good in this book. As all beats, he must have had a generous experience with drugs and knew how to relay it to the readers. He's not brutal and direct like Burroughs, but ambiguous and poetic, and this makes his novels pleasant to read. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transform into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. The same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, which what I did here, I took this painting of the gate to Tangier's Medina, the old town. It is kind of inviting and saying, come in, see what awaits you inside. And it reminded me of Dyer's arrival in Tangier. This is the bag with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel. And for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So, if you want one, don't snooze, or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.